Welcome to the CJK Fire and Safety Education Podcast. CJK Fire and Safety is a specialist consultancy based in far north Queensland, Australia. Specialising in fire safety, the business director and accredited fire safety engineer, Christina Knorr, acts as a special expert witness in legal cases across the nation. This includes developing litigation-compliant reports and being engaged for court cases within the construction stream of the legal industry. Join us at CJK Fire and Safety Education, where we discuss hot topics regarding fire safety in Australia. I am your host, Emily Knox. Today my guest is Christina Knorr, accredited fire safety engineer, special expert, owner and director of CJK Fire and Safety. Welcome back to the podcast, Christina.
Thank you, Emily.
So our topic for today is compliance versus safety in regard to fire safety in construction in Australia. You've been working as a fire safety engineer for the past 10 years. So what is the role of a fire safety engineer in your view?
Well, a fire safety engineer is obviously an engineer who works in construction and works on developing a fire safety strategy of a building. That engineer has got a critical role when buildings are constructed and understands the building, the occupants, potential hazards. Basically, one of the most important engineers on a construction project.
Would you say they work more on new or old buildings, or is it fairly equally spread?
Right now, I think it is more equally spread. Definitely with the modern construction, fire engineers are involved in new design and construction projects, but it is inevitable to have fire engineers on board when existing buildings are identified to have some fire safety issues.
So what makes a building compliant?
In Australia, we measure compliance by complying with the Building Code of Australia. It is the National Construction Code, this is what we call it now, and it consists of Volume 1, 2 and 3, and Volume 1 and 2 is what we refer to as Building Code of Australia.
The BCA.
The BCA, correct.
Yeah.
So to comply with the BCA, we have three possibilities. One is to comply with the deemed to satisfy solution. It's like a recipe book that if you follow X, Y, Z, you comply with the building code.
Yeah.
Then there's the performance requirement, performance solutions developed by fire engineers. And once those are met, you comply with the BCA. And in Australia, we can have a combination. So you can have a building which 80% complies with the deemed to satisfy provision, but then there's one or two things that cannot be complied with, and we develop a performance solution.
Can you give a little example of what a deemed to satisfy provision would be, and then what like an equal performance solution would be?
Yeah, so the deemed to satisfy solution will have often a numerical value attached. For example, your corridor must not be longer than 20 meters, or the width of an exit must be no less than 1 meter, for example. The performance requirement will refer to the actual use of the building and say dimensions or the measurements need to be appropriate for the use of the building.
Okay, yeah. So if they're all elderly people, it will change the use of the building and then the requirement for the length of the corridor, that kind of thing.
Correct. So, for example, if you had an office building and in the deemed to satisfy provisions will consider certain requirements for people, say, in wheelchairs. But then when you do a performance assessment and you know this particular office will be occupied by Spinal Australia, for example, and 80% of the people working there will be wheelchair bound, the design will be different to the deemed to satisfy provisions.
Would you call that holistic design?
Yes, definitely. Fire engineering is holistic design in my view. It's not good to only address one departure from the deemed to satisfy provisions. One need to understand the actual use of the building, the type of occupants, what fire hazards are present in this particular building.
So if we make it 20 meters, would that necessarily mean it was safe?
It depends. It will definitely make it compliant. In terms of safety, one would need to consider what kind of people we've got. Is that, for example, a corridor to a childcare centre? That will have a different impact on the safety of the occupants as opposed to an office building where you just have office workers who are trained in fire evacuation frequently. Obviously, small children and educators trying to evacuate small children will take more time to go through the corridor. But the length of the corridor, for instance, if you use that example, is basically determined based on average speed of travel, an average person, how long it will take to get to a safe space. Without being overwhelmed by smoke. But if you've got smaller feet, it might take longer to get to the same location.
Yeah. So that's the question. Does compliance always mean safety?
Not in my view. No.
Have you got any other examples of compliance versus safety? Maybe you don't need to have a sprinkler system in a certain building, but it would be safer if you did. Or if there's sprinklers, no one knows how to activate them.
Yeah, so a good example is hose reels.
Hosiery.
Hose reels are provided in residential buildings or office buildings, traditionally for the use by the building occupant before the fire brigade arrives inside. So there are fire safety measure for the occupants to use, but it has no use or no benefit if the people don't know how to use it. So if they have never practiced. Same with fire extinguishers. One example I recently experienced, there were fire extinguishers installed in corridors. In terms of compliance, they were all compliant. But the cabinet in which they were installed was too deep and too narrow. So whilst I potentially could reach it, a person with a larger complexity wouldn't get to it that easily as I would.
So they wouldn't even be able to get to the extinguishers, even if they knew how to use them.
But there's no particular requirement in what the cabinet should be. Should be.
Yeah, what the size should be. What do you think the general attitude of builders and developers are in regard to compliance?
Well, obviously, construction is expensive and people are in the business to make money.
Yeah.
And when it comes to building something that's compliant and ticks all the boxes, that's the choice. Safety often requires additional measures and more money to be spent. So unless really necessary or deemed necessary by someone, people try to build compliant buildings and not focus so much on safety and any additional measures.
Yeah. That's where fire safety engineers come in. Where in the design process do you think is best to consult with fire safety engineers?
Ideally, at the conceptual stage of the project, it's when the architect sits down and starts planning a building. We do see that this can be very helpful also for saving money because the fire engineer can straight away identify areas that can be designed in a different manner and be more practical and cheaper. Because we can combine a few things. Instead of trying to tick 10 boxes, we can say, if you do X, Y, Z, so a sprinkler system that you mentioned before, if you install a sprinkler system, you can have concessions for some other measures that will save you money.
Yeah.
So that can happen at the right beginning of the project.
I guess it will also save money too, installing something as it's being built instead of retrofitting it. You only found out you needed it after the building was built. I guess it would cost more money to put stuff in later.
And it's not always possible.
What do you think are the biggest gaps in the process of fire safety engineering?
Well, that's what you triggered before with your question when the fire engineer should be engaged. We are not engaged early enough. But then when we are engaged, we only engage for a short period within this project. We will prepare the performance-based design brief for individual aspects of the project. We'll do our stakeholder consultation. We'll do our fire engineering report, and that's it.
So you don't get to check.
No, we don't get on site in Australia. We don't get on site to check how something is constructed. We may be called up on site to do a final walkthrough and sign off on our projects, but often the product is already completed and you cannot see certain things that you have recommended. So if you do demand a fire resisting wall with a certain fire resistance level, we will have to rely on some other people's certificates and won't be able to check it ourselves.
Yeah. Another thing you just said is that you get engaged to check certain aspects of the building. So you might be engaged to check firewalls, but then there'll be other aspects of that building that you haven't been asked to look at, which may or may not be safe or compliant.
That's correct. And this is why we've got so many project and litigation right now. And the cross claims are exactly about that, where a fire engineer is engaged to look at extended travel distance, for example, but then combustible cladding has been used on the building. The question arises straight away, why did fire engineer not pick it up?
Yeah.
But the problem is that the fire engineer might only have gotten drawings for the corridor, but not the entire building.
Which comes back to that holistic building safety and being able to look at the whole project.
Correct.
Do you have any other ideas on how safety can be improved?
Well, definitely through education. It is important to understand there is a difference between compliance and safety.
Yeah.
And as professionals, besides complying with the building code, we have to also comply with our codes of conduct, which require us to act in the interest of our clients, but also consider functional safety and safety in design. So say, for example, you buy a car, it comes with a set of instructions, or the chair you're sitting on, it comes with a set of instructions. So you've got something to refer to on how to use it properly. But then when you buy an apartment, you don't get this sort of training. You don't know that there's a hose reel for you to use. You don't know that you have to keep your door shut when there's a fire.
Yeah.
So people using the product are not aware of what kind of fire safety systems and provisions they have and what they need to do in an event of emergency. Similarly, people working on projects, they often don't get this holistic overview and understanding of other aspects besides their own field of expertise. So we do see that fire engineers never speak to facade engineers working on external wall projects and things like that. So that collaboration, understanding, education is important.
Yeah. I remember hearing you speak previously about buildings should have a QR code, which I thought was a great idea. So you can like scan your building and then it tells you what evacuation routes are there and what fire systems are there and where to find the hose reels and things like that. That would be a good thing if people could implement that.
Well, I think so, because buildings are there, the build, and then pretty much every building I go to that's existing, the documents is missing. So the documents are missing, and often we don't know if there's a fire engineering report attached to this building. If there is, where it is. We see these buildings that have draft reports instead of final reports. We see buildings where a fire engineering report says one thing, then the building is built differently, not in accordance to the report. Changes are implemented after the report is complete. So there's a lot of inconsistencies because that there's not enough checking, let's say.
So it sounds like we need a lot more education and quality assurance. Speaking of building safety and things that will be changing, there's going to be lots more changes in the future regarding electric vehicles, and that's something I would like to discuss with you in another podcast if you're keen to come back.
Yeah, most certainly.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think everyone will have gained lots of insight into building safety, and really, does compliance really mean safety? It's debatable. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. CJK Fire and Safety hosts a range of educational resources on fire safety and engineering topics, explained in an easy and understandable way. We invite you to enrol in our interactive online courses. All courses have a completion certificate and may contribute to your continuing professional development points. Visit our website at cjkfireandsafety.com.au to learn more.